Signer of the Declaration of Independence, counselor to presidents, and passionate abolitionist, Dr. Benjamin Rush, said that crimes like slavery require national punishments, and without declaring what punishment awaits this evil, you may venture to assure them that it cannot pass with impunity, unless God shall cease to be just or merciful. Years later, in 1865, Congress ratified the 13th Amendment, abolished slavery, making good on the national ideal that all men are indeed created equal, and thus entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But was that the end of the story? Does slavery still exist in America? In the age of scientific and technological wonders like your smartphones and smart cars and Amazon drone deliveries and a connected live streaming world, can an aberration like this, the sale and possession of another human being still exist? We'll talk to someone who actually knows. Stay with us. Is it possible that America's great highway system, the most efficient and sophisticated infrastructure system in the world, is designed to keep American consumers connected to every possible need and convenience? Is it possible that those same roads are being used to transport victims of modern-day slavery to buyers and sellers, slave traders? In 2017, some young concerned Pennsylvanians looked at their backyard in central Pennsylvania. That's right, the green, lush geography that includes Amish country, and found that the reports were true. A place known for good farmland and chocolate was actually a hotspot for modern-day slavery, human trafficking. They met and the idea came into being. Greenlight Operation, an anti-human trafficking organization designed to turn public concern into action. One of those young people was Ben Byler, and he's here with me today. Ben, welcome to State of Independence.
Thank you.
So glad to have you here. Tell me now, you're a young man, you could be doing just about anything, and yet and still you're doing this wonderful, important work. How did you get involved?
Yeah, so when I was younger, my parents, they read missionary stories to me growing up. And those stories just told about how ordinary people learned about issues in their life and really were convicted by God to go and make a difference. And so to me, that was the standard for what it meant to be a Christian. And so as I grew up and I learned about human trafficking in high school, I knew that there had to be something that had to be done.
What's the definition, by the way, of human trafficking? I mean, we just talked about it and compared it to slavery, but tell us a little bit more about what human trafficking is.
Sure, yeah. So human trafficking, as you said, is modern day slavery. And a technical definition is that it's the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some form of labor or commercial sex act. And so that's the kind of the legal definition. But at the end of the day, it is slavery. And I think something that some people get confused about when they hear trafficking is they think that it might always involve movement. So you have to be moving people from place to place. But oftentimes it doesn't involve movement. And it's simply, like I said, slavery, and it's forcing people and manipulating people into giving some form of labor or some kind of sexual act for the other person's benefit.
Wow. Is it mostly women that are affected, or women and men, or girls and boys, or?
Yeah, so globally, and even then in kind of focus on the United States, Pennsylvania, it's mostly sex trafficking versus labor trafficking. It's mostly sex trafficking, and it's mostly towards women. Now, a vast percentage of women initially start, the average age of entry into human trafficking is age 14. But oftentimes, they'll spend a lot more time in it. But yeah, there are a lot of minors that end up being brought into human trafficking, and yeah.
Is there a profile for the people who become victims of this? I mean, is there do you find that if the average age of the girls would be 14, is there a particular profile that they fit? Do they come from broken homes or homes where there's abuse, or is there some kind of a profile that is consistent for the young people who end up being trafficked?
Absolutely, yeah. And really, one thing that is commonly said throughout anti-human trafficking organizations is that it can happen to anyone. And while that is true, you're exactly right that it might happen to any demographic, any type of person from any town, or any background, but really it happens to vulnerable people. So whether that is people in a hard economic situation, if it's people that are struggling with a substance abuse, or if they're a recent immigrant to the United States, those kind of people that have these difficulties surrounding them oftentimes fall prey to traffickers.
Wow. So they can be compromised because of the fact that they have a challenge of one kind or the other. There are boys that are also being trafficked?
Yes, yeah, and that's one of these things that, while it is a much smaller percentage, sadly, because it is a smaller percentage, oftentimes there aren't a lot of resources for boys, and so that is a significant need. Is that just earlier this month, the U.S. Department of State released a trafficking in persons report, and it's this very lengthy report that actually covers the global efforts to combat human trafficking. And something they say year in, year out is that, particularly in the United States and across the globe, is there needs to be more resources to help boys that are caught in human trafficking and to provide services for them.
So what do you do? So like during the course of a day, we know that there's this horrible problem that all these people are being abused. And I imagine there are probably people who are not teenagers who get caught up in this as well, because they can be compromised for whatever reason. So your organization has determined to do something about it. What precisely do you do? Like, what does a day look like for Ben Byler?
Yeah, so I'll start off broadly and then maybe get into kind of my daily activities. So really, Greenlight Operations work, and really any kind of organization that sees like a problem and wants to do something about it. There's kind of 3 stages or ways to work to solve this problem. And that's like prevention, intervention, and restoration. And so we want to tackle all 3 of those areas. Now, I'm young and the people on our team were young. We don't have years of experience and resources. And so for us, we for Greenlight Operation, have restructured it to kind of say, okay, we're going to work on prevention. And instead of intervention, we'll leave that up to law enforcement, but we will collaborate with them. And so we've had times where they've come to us and asked us questions about different cases, and we've been able to provide insight on, hey, like that might be trafficking, that might not. So prevention, collaboration, and then restoration. Really, you got to prevent the issue from happening so that more people aren't brought into it.
Right.
You have to intervene, you have to collaborate with others. We really have a big focus on the community aspect of fighting human trafficking. For years, the National Human Trafficking Hotline has talked about how community members are some of the most significant people that reach out to the hotline and phone in about, hey, I think there's trafficking going on, and that leads to investigations and rescues. And so with collaboration, that community aspect, we really want to focus on working with lawmakers, law enforcement to kind of work systemically to fight human trafficking, and then also work with different churches and schools and community groups to fight it. And then lastly, the restoration aspect, which is one of the biggest ways I think that we can help, is by providing services to human trafficking survivors. And that looks like, for us, is we want to open up a home, and we've been, over the last few years, we've been raising money to purchase a home to serve human trafficking survivors. So that's kind of the big picture. As for me right now, I'm the marketing and development director, and because we don't have the home yet, I've mostly been working on just building those connections throughout the community, doing stuff like this, and as well as using social media to really push awareness about the issue. And just recently there was a report by the Human Trafficking Institute. They had a report on human trafficking, and they saw that, especially in 2020 with the pandemic, that human trafficking recruitment went up a lot online, on Facebook, on social media. And so traffickers are using social media. They're using that as a tool to recruit people, and we want to use it as a tool to help people.
So how might they do that? I mean, let's say some young person's on social media. How might they get, what would be common trafficking, how would a trafficker trap somebody or lure somebody in on social media? Is there like are they sending them to a website? Are they starting a conversation with them? Are they saying respond to this or that? I mean, how are they doing that?
Yeah, most of the time I think, especially online, you see a lot of people that, and once again, particularly with the pandemic, they're lonely, they want connection. We all are meant to have connections with people. And so, these young people are online, and these traffickers, they recruit and they kind of groom, is the term that people use, to basically start that conversation, tell someone they look beautiful, and tell them these comforting lies that they care for them. And that's something that sadly happens a lot with people. And really, I don't know if you've seen the movie Taken.
No.
But it's a movie.
Liam Neeson.
Yes.
Yeah. I haven't seen it, but I've seen it advertised.
Okay, yeah. So that movie, that's about human trafficking, and in it, Liam Neeson's, character, his daughter gets kidnapped. And that's something that I think when people hear human trafficking, they think, oh, kidnapping. But oftentimes, it's through building relationships with people and like having people trust to where, victims, they can't even believe that someone was a trafficker because they're like, oh, they were my friend, they were my boyfriend, how could they do this? So online particularly, it's a lot of grooming, and then eventually saying, hey, let's meet up and go on a date and stuff like that. But then eventually it leads to further things.
Right. How do you actually rescue somebody? Because I was so heartened to hear you say that among the things, along with restoration, there's rescuing people. How do you rescue somebody? How does somebody get rescued from it?
Yeah, so like I said, for me and even for Greenlight right now, we don't have the resources to directly rescue, but we have worked with law enforcement to where, obviously, particularly with sex trafficking, a lot of cases might come up where there's a prostitution, thing going on, and police find that, and so it's like, okay, was this just prostitution or was this human trafficking? And so that's where we might give some tips on like the signs and how to communicate best with a prostitute. And sometimes there are operations that are done by police where they break into a home or something like that and say like, hey, we need to like bring someone out. Oftentimes, I would say it's honestly through a lot of conversations with victims, because a lot of victims don't even know necessarily that they're being trafficked.
Wow.
And so it might take a lot of conversation and really getting to know people and building that trust for yourself so that you can then point them in the right direction.
Right. Is there a relationship between the pornography industry and trafficking, human trafficking?
Absolutely, yeah. And right now in the news, there's a wonderful organization called Exodus Cry, and they are...
What are they called?
Exodus Cry. And they're working, they have a lot of awareness campaigns about human trafficking. And right now they're targeting, Pornhub, which is one of the biggest pornography websites. And there's just been a lot of legal trouble and of course human trafficking tied into the pornography industry. That really, once again, a lot of people might say, oh, they have a choice and people want to do this and they enjoy it and that kind of stuff. But time and time again, there are lawsuits, there are people that are getting out of it and saying, no, I didn't have a choice. They filmed this without my permission, or they kind of coerced me into doing it and manipulated me into doing it. And so that's definitely a huge issue where pornography is a problem tied to human trafficking.
Wow. Well, these are human beings that we're talking about, and it's a wonderful thing that you're doing this great work. Tell me the Christian side to this. Is there? Do you all, from a Christian standpoint, do you work with people who've been rescued, or the people who are volunteers for your organization, and pray with them and study the scriptures while you do what you do?
Yeah. So like I said, with the young nature of our organization, we haven't gotten to the point of being able to reach out to a lot of survivors or victims. We've been able to reach out to a few, and we've definitely prayed with them and pointed them to Christ. But that's definitely something in our Restoration Home program that we want to emphasize, is that, of course, as a Christian, we can't force Christianity upon them, but we can definitely point them to a Savior and to someone who can bring true restoration beyond just getting out of human trafficking. And so even just, our leadership team, and, we're all Christians, we all love Jesus and want to see Him glorified and really see restoration come to these survivors in a holistic way, not just through, getting out of it.
Right. Tell me now about whether or not there's a link between child abuse and domestic abuse and human trafficking.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, once again, when it comes to human trafficking, a lot of the times the risk factor goes up when there are things present like domestic abuse and sexual abuse and all that kind of stuff. Right. And so,
are the instances of kids that say, my parents, a parent was beating me half to death, and so I ran away and then got sucked into this? Or
so two things. So one, in the trafficking persons report that I mentioned earlier, there was one statistic that just shocked me, that I think this was globally, that about 41% of child trafficking cases end up having family members involved in facilitating the trafficking.
Wow.
And so that's a really high percentage. And once again, it kind of breaks away from the narrative.
Knowingly facilitating, or
yes, knowingly, perpetuating it. And so, once again, it breaks the narrative of a stranger just kidnapping, and people talk about stranger danger, and that's true. But when it comes to these kind of cases, sometimes it is, families perpetuating it. It might be a relative.
So could it be somebody saying, you have a parent has an argument with their kid and they say, get out? That would be perpetuating it, I suppose. That would be facilitating it. I mean, if they threw them out of the house, if they...
So like I said, there's kind of two ways in which it could be perpetuated. And that's, so the first thing is a family member who might be abusing their child and perpetuate it directly. And then, like you said, about if someone says get out or kick someone out, another huge issue, I saw this recently, I believe it was from the FBI, that they said that about 60% of child sex trafficking cases, those children came from the foster care system, and they were runaway homeless youth. And so you do see that where if a family does kick someone out, or if they don't have parents or don't have a stable family environment, and they're in the welfare system, they're highly more likely to get involved with human trafficking. And as I said earlier, when it comes to feeling lonely, looking for purpose, looking for love, they go to whoever will give it to them.
What is Congress doing about this? I mean, we elect people on the local level and the state level, and certainly on the federal level, and the hope would be that members of Congress are looking at this and figuring out ways to combat this. Is there anything happening on the legislative?
Yeah, definitely. And we recently actually, on Greenlight Operations website, we have a page dedicated just to legislation. And so someone on our team, our communications director, she does a great job updating that regularly to say, hey, this bill is being passed, it's now law, this one's going from the House to the Senate, that kind of stuff. And so recently, in the last couple of years, there's a couple of legislations that have moved forward. One, I believe federally recently, is that you'd be surprised that this wasn't the case already, but that something like child marriages are illegal, in America.
Right.
But that was something recently that wasn't necessarily officially stated, even though most people don't do that. And so that's one. Legislation-wise, there's something called the Nordic model, or the equality model, that basically it works to try and, particularly when it comes to prostitution, it works to, instead of, punishing and treating victims of human trafficking like criminals, particularly with prostitution, it really shifts the weight of punishment onto the buyers. And if you think about stopping the demand for human trafficking, if you didn't have people, wanting to engage in that kind of stuff, then you wouldn't have this issue. And so the Nordic model, really legislation-wise, it says hey, keep prostitution illegal, but don't punish the prostitute, punish the buyer. And so that's something that's being pushed. There are some legislation that say oh, we'll just make prostitution legal, and that's not helpful. And in any country, there was a recent report that talked about that never helps. So that's some legislation that's going on.
No, that's very, very good. Don't go anywhere. I want to ask you a question about Facebook, because I've heard that some human trafficking may be happening as a result of interaction on Facebook, but I want to give you time to kind of talk to me about that. So we're going to go to break for 1 second, so stay with me. When we return, I want to ask Ben about some of the biggest myths about human trafficking and what to do if you suspect it. It's important stuff, so stay with us.
You're watching Joe Watkins' State of Independence on Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Share your comments about today's program in the comment box at joewatkins.org.
His name is Ben Byler, and he's one of the team members of Greenlight Operation in Pennsylvania, one of the passionate young voices in the battle against modern-day slavery. Ben, let's get practical in the few minutes that we have left. Facebook. almost everybody's on it. And is Facebook a place where human traffickers go to get victims?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when it comes to recruitment, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of it is a grooming process. It's a communication process. And since Facebook is a communication tool, it's often used to communicate with potential victims and to kind of lure them in and to build kind of that trust.
What, I would imagine Facebook is doing something about that. Is there anything that Facebook is doing to try to cut down, or at least to monitor or to police, so that people don't fall victim to human trafficking on their platform?
Yeah, Facebook is a huge platform, and so it's one of these things that there are ways that you can report it on Facebook, and you can not too long ago, one of our team members, she was just searching through Facebook, and she stumbled across like a page that was trying to recruit people for human trafficking, and so she reported it. And you can also report it to the National Human Trafficking Hotline and get law enforcement involved. So they are doing stuff to combat it. I would say though, because they're such a big organization and company, it often is a slow process. So.
Yeah. So one of the biggest myths that we have going is that this kind of stuff happens in other parts of the world, but not here, not here. And here it is. You're in central Pennsylvania, and you're saying that it's a huge problem. What are police departments doing to work with you and to combat this?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, the first step is that prevention, that awareness aspect. And so with police, we've been able to, throughout kind of Central PA, we've been able to do over 70 trainings with different churches, schools, but then particularly with law enforcement. And that's something that we're working to, and I know other organizations work to as well, is to say like, hey, there needs to be like a consistent training for police officers to be aware of human trafficking, so that when they encounter people, especially oftentimes in human trafficking, there's prostitution, but there's often a lot of substance abuse. And so both for victims, perpetrators. And so once again, you have to be careful with, a victim might be committing some crimes. And it's not to say that it should be fully excused, but we have to be careful with how, law enforcement engages with that and understands, hey, this might be trafficking, and how to appropriately address that.
Right. So so much of this involves, of course, women and young women and girls and boys. But what about men, adult men? Are adult men at all susceptible to being human trafficked?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, when it comes to people perpetuating, I think, something like human trafficking. Something I've heard years ago is just hurt people hurt people. And that's something that I think people need to be aware of, is that, particularly from a Christian perspective, that we're all fallen and we all are prone, to sin. And so for men, there can be men that might be sexually abused, and often there aren't services to address that. And so then they might get involved and so yeah, it's definitely an issue for everyone, and therefore everyone needs to rally around and do something about it.
I think most men would figure well, grown men are not susceptible to this because they could fight back and they could do something about it. But I suppose a guy, especially if he's compromised in some way, could fall prey to this just like anybody else.
Yeah.
What about thankfully, you're a Christian organization, but what are churches doing about this? I mean, this is, the Bible tells us to be doers of the word, not hearers only. I mean, for maybe the lion's share of us, it's wonderful to go to church and to feel comfortable that we go to church every Sunday and we put our tithe in the offering basket, and then we go home and maybe we listen to Christian music on the radio, and maybe read a scripture every day. But what are Christian institutions and churches doing about this issue to assist you to help do something about it?
Yeah, so Greenlight Operation is pretty unique, and we're very grateful that we actually started off as a ministry of a church in Central PA. And so we have just so much support from that church, Christian Life Assembly. And then I attend a church on the East Shore in Harrisburg, and that church has also been very supportive. And so it's a slow process, but I think really, Christ's message of justice and mercy and stuff, it really ties into this, and we want to, help churches to understand that and help out.
Yeah, beautifully said, beautifully said. Well, Ben, you and Jessica and Jordan and your team at Greenlight Operation really are an inspiration to us. So thank you for taking the responsibility, I think it's called, to love your neighbors by fighting for justice for the victims of sex trafficking. May God bless you and protect you in this critical mission. We'll be right back with our producer, Jeff Coleman, and closing thoughts.
Learn more about Joe Watkins and the mission of this program at joewatkins.net. And tell Joe what you thought about today's program in the comment box.
So now let's talk to our great producer, Jeff Coleman.
Well, I learned a lot.
So did I.
Yeah. I mean, it I think makes you rethink your technology, but it also makes you rethink your awareness. And hopefully people can be alert without being paranoid.
Well, it's kind of scary, Jeff. I mean, imagine
Yeah.
a young girl, a teenage girl on one of these social media platforms, and she posts a picture of herself, and somebody responds as, oh, you're really pretty.
Right.
And then the girl says, oh, who's that?
Right.
And then she responds, and it's one of these horrible people that.
But I guess here's the balance that we're looking at. We're aware now.
Right.
We're going to engage on this, but we're not going to huddle and retreat.
Yeah.
That our children still need to be out in neighborhoods. I mean, one of the things I think we've noticed because of waves of different kinds of fear is that parents now are really kind of pulling up the drawbridge in some cases, moving to suburbia. I live in a suburban neighborhood, and the kids not have, you have to be deliberate almost about having interactions in cities. So we spend a lot of time going to cities, and going to city playgrounds and other places. Otherwise, you will be smart, be engaged, but don't be paralyzed by fear, and that's the key.
Well, we can't be afraid. I agree with you 100%. We can't be afraid. But my fear becomes is that this is everywhere. Maybe people are more susceptible to more susceptible prey living in an inner city.
Right.
But I'm thinking that this is probably in the suburbs too. That,
Sure.
That suburban kids are being drawn in. I think these people prey on folks who have more distressed backgrounds, circumstances. But
yeah. It's one of the things Ben said I thought was interesting is the connection to the pornography industry, and realizing that as the appetite of the culture grows for more and more pornography, and the pool of participants you have to keep filling, and you're not going to get that by normal means. So it's going to perpetuate it until one or the other gives, and that industry has a lot to be held accountable for.
Oh man, yeah, so well said, so well said. Well, there's evil in the world, and it's closer than we think. But for those of us who believe in the message of the Bible, we know that one day good will triumph over evil, and one day God will wipe away every tear from the eyes of victims and those who are sorrowful for their part in harming others. He'll make all things new. Special thanks to Ben Byler for sharing the heart of the organization he helps lead, Greenlight Operation. It's just another way that Christians are following the mission of loving your neighbor as yourself. Visit their website to find out how you can be part of the answer for someone trapped in this kind of slavery. Take a minute to let me know how you found this program and how it may have impacted your thinking. I'd love to hear from each one of you. From America's First Capital, Philadelphia, I'm Joe Watkins. Thanks so much for watching.
Joe Watkins' State of Independence is a production of Lighthouse TV, positively different. Made possible in part because of the support of viewers like you.